I watched my parents wave goodbye from the airport window with my sister beside them and my small suitcase in my lap. I was just 10. They said it was just for a week. It turned into 20 years. Now they want me back, but they have no idea what my uncle left behind for me. I still remember the cold airport bench beneath me. My little legs were swinging, not even touching the floor, and my tiny suitcase sat by my side like a lost puppy. I was only 10 too young to understand what was really happening. My uncle sat next to me, quiet, watching my parents as they walked toward the departure gate with my older sister. She was smiling, holding Mum's hand. Dad looked excited, like he couldn't wait to get on the plane. Me, I just stared at them, confused. I didn't even cry, not yet. Mum bent down and kissed my forehead quickly, like she was in a rush. "We'll be back soon, sweetheart," she smiled. Dad ruffled my hair. "Just a short trip. Okay, be good for your uncle." Then they turned, wheeled their bags behind them, and walked away. I stood up, thinking they might turn around for one last wave. They didn't. They boarded the plane with my sister, and I never saw that version of them again. I didn't say a word as I sat back down. My uncle placed his hand gently over mine. He didn't speak either. He just gave me a sad little smile and said, "Let's go home." I followed him like a shadow. I still didn't cry. I think my body hadn't caught up to what my heart already knew. I wasn't going home. I was being left behind. That night. I slept in a strange bed in my uncle's small guest room. I kept looking at the door, waiting to hear the sound of my parents' voices, their keys in the lock, maybe even my sister's laugh, but it was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I hugged my stuffed bear tight and whispered, "They said they'd come back soon." But no one came, not the next day, not the next week, not even that year. And that was the night something inside me changed. A part of me shut down. I didn't know it then, but my real life was just beginning, and it didn't include the people who gave me birth. My uncle's house was nothing fancy. It was a 2-bedroom place at the edge of town, with creaky floors, old furniture, and a heater that made loud clunking sounds every winter. But it always smelled like coffee and fresh toast. And somehow, that made it feel like home. He didn't have much, but he had a warm heart. He cooked for me, walked me to school when he could, and left little notes in my lunchbox that said things like, "You're brave and you can do anything." At night, he'd check my homework. Even when he was too tired from work, he wasn't perfect, but he tried. Still, every birthday was like a quiet reminder of what I'd lost, year after year. There were no birthday cards from my parents, no phone calls, no surprise gifts in the mail, just silence. And every year, I made the same wish when I blew out my candles that they'd come back, that they'd remember me. But the candles always flickered out, and nothing changed. School was its own kind of battlefield. I remember one day in 5th grade, we had a Mother's Day craft project. Everyone was supposed to make a card for their mums. The girl next to me was all excited, talking about how her mum loved sunflowers and chocolate when she asked what my mum liked. I panicked. I blurted out something random, like blue, then quickly changed the subject. I couldn't tell her I hadn't heard my mum's voice in years, so I started lying. "She's travelling," I'd say. "She's working overseas." It was easier than admitting the truth that she left me and never looked back. Uncle never asked too many questions about how I felt. I think he knew I wasn't ready to open up. Instead, he just supported me the best he could. He was always reminding me to stay focused on school. "Books will never walk away from you," he'd say, "so hold on to them." At first, I didn't listen. I was too angry, too numb. But over time, his words started sinking in. I started studying harder. I kept to myself. Mostly, I wasn't the kind of kid who had a lot of sleepovers or big friend groups. I became the quiet one, the girl who always had her nose in a book, who turned in her homework early, who avoided group photos and family tree assignments. Teachers called me mature for my age, but really, I had just grown up too fast. And as the years went by, I stopped expecting anything from my parents, no letters, no visits, no explanations. It was like they had erased me from their lives. And eventually, I did the same to them in my heart, not out of hate, just to survive. My uncle became my whole world. I didn't say it much, but I loved him deeply for never leaving, for being there when everyone else walked away. His little house, no matter how old or small, was my shelter, and I promised myself that one day I'd make him proud, even if I had to build a new life from the pieces they left behind. At 30, I thought I'd left the past behind me. I had a steady job, a small but cozy apartment, and the confidence that comes with independence. Life had finally started to feel like mine again, something I had earned, something I had worked for. But then, one day, while scrolling through Facebook on my lunch break, I saw a friend request that made my stomach twist. It was from my mum. I didn't know how to react. My heart beat faster as I stared at her profile picture. She hadn't changed much, the same warm smile, the same familiar eyes. I hesitated for a long time before hitting accept. My fingers shook, and I could feel my breath hitch in my chest. I had spent years burying any thoughts of them, and now, here they were, suddenly popping back into my life like a ghost I couldn't shake off. I didn't expect what happened next. A few days after the friend request, I walked into the office, my heels clicking on the floor, and nearly froze in my tracks. Standing there in the reception area were my parents. My heart sank. I hadn't seen them in so long. I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly recognize them again. They looked different, older, tired, and thinner than I remembered. My mum's once lush hair was dull and unkempt. My dad had always been a proud man, but now he looked defeated, like a shadow of the person I used to know. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. My co-workers were looking at me, trying to figure out what was going on. The air was thick with awkwardness. "Mom, Dad," I asked, my voice tight, barely above a whisper. They both smiled, though it was more of a grimace than anything. We thought we could stop by," my mum said, her voice softer than I remembered. It almost felt like she was unsure of herself. "It's been a long time. What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, my voice shaky, though I tried to sound unaffected. "We need to talk," my dad said, his face serious. Can we sit down somewhere?" His voice was strangely quiet, almost apologetic, as if he was trying to choose his words carefully. I could feel the weight of their presence, but more than that, I could feel the old wounds reopening. I led them to the conference room, trying to hold it together, to act like an adult, like a professional. But inside, my heart was pounding. What did they want after all these years once we were seated? My mum glanced at my dad, who seemed to be taking the lead. "We've been through a lot," he began, his voice shaky. "You know, we lost everything." My eyes narrowed, not understanding. "What do you mean?" I asked. Though I already had a sinking feeling, I knew where this was headed. "Bad investments," he muttered. "Everything went wrong. The money, the house is gone." He paused, and I saw the familiar look of desperation in his eyes. "We've hit rock bottom." My heart was beating faster now, but I didn't want to let them see my anger. It wasn't the right time for that, not yet. "And your sister?" I asked, almost too calmly. "Isn't she helping you?" My mum's face shifted, her expression darkening. "He's married now, she's doing well, but she cut us off. She's been living her life without us for years, and she doesn't want anything to do with us anymore." I felt a small bit of satisfaction. My sister, the one who always got everything handed to her, had turned her back on them too, but I didn't let that show. The words my mother said next took me by surprise. "We know we messed up," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We regret everything, darling, every choice we made, every moment we lost with you. We want to reconnect. We've learned the hard way. We've made mistakes, but we want to fix things with you." I didn't know how to respond. Their faces were full of guilt, full of pleading, and there was a part of me that wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that they had truly changed, that they were finally understanding the damage they had done. But another part of me, one that had been hurt so deeply for so long, knew better. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, my voice cold now. "Why come to me after all this time?" My mum's eyes filled with tears. "We need a place to stay," she said, her voice trembling. "We've lost everything, and we're ashamed. We don't have anywhere else to go." I didn't say anything at first. My mind was racing. It was like I could hear the faint echoes of the past, the countless nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wishing they would come back, wondering if they still cared. But now it felt like a cruel joke. "We need you," my dad added, his voice barely a whisper. "We need your help." Their words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had built a life without them. I had survived without them. But now, they were asking for everything I had. They wanted forgiveness, and they wanted me to give them a place to stay. They needed me to fill the emptiness they'd left behind. I looked at them, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel everything: the hurt, the anger, the disappointment, the betrayal. And slowly, I began to realize just how much I had grown, how much I had changed. They wanted me to be the one to save them, but I wasn't that little girl anymore, the one who waited by the window, hoping they would come back. I was a woman now, and I had a decision to make after my uncle passed away. I thought I would be ready to clean out his house. He had always kept things neat, and I thought I knew every inch of his small home. But when I stepped into his study, I found myself overwhelmed. It felt strange being in the space where he had spent so many quiet years, doing things I never fully understood. I began sorting through old papers, books, and mementos. It was a slow, tedious process. My hands shook slightly as I moved one thing after another, memories flooding back. My uncle had always been my rock, my protector, but as I shifted through the clutter on his desk, something caught my eye. Behind a row of old books, I noticed a small metal safe. I hadn't seen it before, and there was something about it that made my heart race. It was so out of place, like it had been hidden there deliberately. I didn't know what to expect, but I felt a deep pull to open it. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling slightly as I turned the dial. The safe creaked open, revealing a stack of papers, letters, and an old, worn photograph. I carefully pulled out the letters first. Most of them were personal notes between my uncle and other people business partners, old friends. But there were a few official-looking documents that caught my attention. As I flipped through the papers, one stood out. It was a deed to a house, fully paid off. In my name, it was real estate I had never known about, and it felt like a strange dream to see my name written on it. Confused, I kept going. The next paper was a contract for my uncle's business, and I felt my heart stop as I read the words, "The business," which he had built from the ground up, was also in my name, 70% of it. To be exact, the document was legally binding, signed by both my uncle and someone I hadn't seen in years. My parents. I could feel the air in the room grow heavy, thick with the weight of the discovery. How had I never known about this? I turned to the final piece of paper, an envelope with a letter inside. I opened it carefully, my heart pounding in my chest. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Who's my uncle's? Hi, dear," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer here. I wish I could have told you sooner, but the truth was too painful. When I took you in all those years ago, I did so out of love, but it wasn't just because I wanted to help you. It was because your parents abandoned you. They told me you were too much of a burden, and they didn't want the responsibility. That's when I made the decision to adopt you and take you in as my own." I could feel the blood drain from my face. My hands shook violently, and I sat down at the desk, the letter still in my grasp. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. My parents, the ones who had left me in foster care, had actually signed away their rights to me. They had labelled me a burden, something too much for them to handle. They didn't care enough to even keep me. The letter continued, I know this will come as a shock to you. I never told you about this because I didn't want you to feel like you were unwanted. You've always been mine. And I never wanted you to know the truth about how your parents treated you. I wanted you to have a life of love, not one tainted by rejection. I put the letter down, unable to process what I had just read. The room felt like it was closing in around me. My uncle had loved me enough to protect me from the truth, to shield me from the pain of knowing that my parents had chosen to leave me behind. But now, after all these years, the truth had hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just abandoned, I had been discarded. My parents didn't just forget me, they chose to erase me from their lives. Tears started to well up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. There was too much to take in. My uncle had given me everything. He had taken me in, raised me, and protected me, but at what cost I had spent so many years wondering why my parents had left me, why they had never come back. I had convinced myself that they must have had a good reason, that maybe they still loved me in their own way. But now, with my uncle's letter in my hands, I realized that love had never been the issue. It was never about love. It was about them not caring enough to keep me. As the full weight of the revelation settled in, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion crash over me. The years of feeling abandoned, the emptiness I had carried with me for so long, all started to make sense. My uncle had been the father figure I needed, but he had also been carrying a secret, one that he had hoped I would never have to bear. But now that I knew the truth, I had a choice to make. It wasn't just about the property or the business anymore. It was about understanding the betrayal, the hurt, and the lessons I had learned along the way. As I sat there in my uncle's study, surrounded by the remnants of a life he had carefully built for me, I realized that the person who had truly saved me all along wasn't the one who had abandoned me. It was the one who had never let me go. After finding out the shocking truth about my uncle and his hidden protection of me, I didn't know what to do with myself. Part of me wanted to rush into some form of revenge, to make them feel the betrayal they put me through, but I also knew it had to be done carefully. I couldn't afford to let my emotions take the wheel. I had to think this through. So, when my parents asked to move back in with me, I pretended to be the forgiving daughter they hoped for. The reality, though, was far different. I agreed to let them stay for now, but in the back of my mind, I was already planning my next move. I wanted them to feel the same powerlessness, the same abandonment that I had felt growing up. But this time, it would be on my terms. When they first arrived at my house, they were more than just grateful, they were expectant. My mother, especially, was quick to act like she still had some ownership over the space. "Oh, how nice it is to be home," she said, trying to throw a smile on her face, but I could see the way her eyes gleamed when she looked around. She acted as if this was still the home she had walked away from, as if she could just waltz in and resume her role as the matriarch. But I wasn't about to let them feel comfortable for long. I set clear boundaries from the start. "You're welcome to stay here for a while, but there are house rules," I said. "You'll respect my space, my time, and most importantly, my privacy." They nodded, acting all sweet and polite, pretending to be the family I had once dreamed they were. But deep down, I could feel them testing the waters, little by little. They began asking about money, about my business, about my accounts. It started off with casual questions, but quickly escalated into requests. Mum, ever the manipulator, would casually ask if she could have access to my bank account or if I could help them pay for things. It was always under the guise of helping family and we've been through so much together. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, like she expected me to just hand over everything I had worked for, like I owed them something for the years they had abandoned me. But I didn't. Every time they crossed a line, I smiled politely, I knew that the more they pushed, the closer I was to my plan. I started gathering evidence, small things that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but would later come in handy. I made sure to record their requests, took notes of their behavior, and kept their comments about money and access to my life in writing. Then, the perfect opportunity came when I arranged for them to attend what they thought would be a legal meeting. I had told them that it was a discussion to help them with their financial troubles, something that would give them a sense of security. They jumped at the chance, of course, thinking I was going to offer them a way out of their financial mess. But the meeting wasn't with any lawyer. It was at a real estate office where they were handed a lease agreement, signed by me. Of course, as tenants. The shock on their faces when they realized what they had just agreed to was priceless. It was a simple lease, a mere formality, but they had no idea how deep the betrayal would cut. As the agent explained the terms, they could only stare, speechless. "Wait a minute," my father stammered, looking at the lease in disbelief. This isn't what we thought it was." I didn't even bother to answer him directly. Instead, I reached for my phone and pulled up an email that had been sent years ago, one I had kept tucked away for the perfect moment. The email was from my parents, written when I was still a teenager. I had never thought I would need it, but now it was the perfect time, with a steady hand. I showed them the email. The words were sharp, cutting through the air between us like a blade. "She's a dead weight. We can't afford to keep her anymore. She's just holding us back." Their faces went completely pale. They had no idea what to say, no way to argue their way out of it. I stood up, my voice calm, unwavering. "This is your rent invoice. You're no longer family. You're my tenants now." I watched them. The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. The very people who had cast me aside all those years ago, the ones who had decided I was too much of a burden to care for, were now at my mercy. They couldn't move. My mother's lips trembled, but she couldn't speak. My father stood there, frozen, unsure of how to process what had just happened. I didn't need to say anything else. The silence between us was all the answer they needed. My revenge wasn't about screaming or yelling. It wasn't about tearing them down in front of others. It was about making them feel the helplessness I had felt all those years ago. It was about taking control, about turning the tables in a way they never saw coming. They would never see me the same way again. I wasn't their little girl anymore, and I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. A few months passed, and the house felt like it had shifted. The air had changed. The energy was different, lighter, as if the weight of everything that had happened had slowly begun to lift. My parents were still here, but their presence had started to wear thin. They never really apologized for what they had done, no remorse, no understanding of the pain they caused. Instead, they held on to their pride. They never asked for more, never begged for anything, though I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to manipulate me again. Finally, one morning, they packed their things. There were no grand scenes, no dramatic goodbyes. They just silently gathered their belongings, avoiding eye contact with me. I didn't stop them. I didn't need to say anything. The silence between us spoke volumes. They were leaving because they could no longer play the game. They couldn't pretend anymore that they were welcome, that they still had a place in my life. I watched them as they walked out the door. My heart didn't race with anger like it used to. There were no tears or bitterness. There was just peace, a peace I hadn't felt in years. As they loaded their things into the car, I stood still, quietly observing for a moment. I felt grateful, not for them, but for the freedom that this moment represented. The final chapter of the story I had been living for so long was now closed. They had finally left out. In the hallway, I glanced up at my uncle's portrait, the one that hung in the space where we had once shared so many memories. I reached up and softly touched the frame, my fingers brushing against the glass. "You were my real family," I whispered to the empty house, my voice steady but filled with emotion. That's when it truly hit me. Family isn't defined by blood. It's not who shares your last name or who gave birth to you. Family is the people who stand by you when everything else falls apart. It's the ones who stick with you when the world turns its back. It's those who choose to be there for you, not because they have to, but because they want to. I took a deep breath, looking out the window as the car drove away. Carrying my parents further and further from my life, I felt stronger than I had in years. I had finally reclaimed my power, and in doing so, I had learned the most valuable lesson of all. They wanted to come back home, but they forgot they left their home behind years ago.